I will be forever the myth.
You're the king of kings,
There's always a pecking order. The little packers never mess with the big packers. So I'm a rooster, and he's a chicken, so to speak.
So let's talk about the 1980 Olympia, Wayne. You were one of the few guys that I've talked to that was actually there at the show because it was in Australia, your hometown. And, of course, this is probably the most controversial Mr. Olympia ever. It's one of the most talked about Mr. Olympias ever. I mean, here we are now in 2016, and people still talk about it. So tell us your thoughts on that Mr. Olympia in 1980.
Okay, well, it was somewhat controversial for a whole lot of reasons. But let's just try and analyze, first of all, the physiques, and then we'll talk about the politics after that.
Okay.
It was pretty clear from the beginning that it was a sort of a three-way battle, I thought, between Arnold, Chris Dickerson, and Frank Zane. My initial thoughts at the very start of the contest that day were that Chris Dickerson was perhaps a nose in front.
Mm-hmm.
Frank Zane just was perfect all over, but maybe didn't quite have the size, you could say, to match with Arnold. And Arnold's condition was good. His legs weren't as big as they had been in his previous Olympias. Some people said they were weak. I would say that they were okay. They didn't look obviously way out of proportion. His upper body was outstanding. His arm poses killed pretty much everybody. Mm-hmm. His double biceps and his twisting back poses, there was nobody that had a better version of that. So then it got right down to the nitty-gritty. Okay, let's think, why should Chris Dickerson win this, or why should Arnold win it, or can Frank Zane win it? Mike Menser, I feel, probably could have been in the mix for the top three, but I didn't think he was quite sharp enough and his abs quite hard enough for him to be a contender for the title. So I was comfortable if he had placed third, but he ended up fifth, as we all know. So then we come down to Chris Dickerson versus Arnold. Now, let's compare upper bodies and lower bodies first of all, because this is no doubt what some of the judges probably would have thought. Chris Dickerson had the better lower body. He had the better legs, better shape, better size, great calves. Then we come to the midsection. Okay, Chris was okay, he never really had a washboard midsection. Arnold's midsection, good, not his best body part, but certainly not out of shape. And then we come to the upper body. The arms, twisting back poses, Arnold was clearly well in front on that. So you start to weigh up faults and weaknesses, good points, bad points, and as I saw it, after comparing these two and giving it a lot of thought since the event and looking at it on the film, I felt that Arnold just simply had the edge overall, taking into account the factors that I've just mentioned. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people are going to say Arnold got it because of politics. His friend was Paul Graham. He was Arnold. It's hard not to give it to a champion. All of those factors could have been a small influence in the judges' minds, but if the judges were truly judging what they saw in front of them, on that day, I was not uncomfortable with Arnold's victory over Chris Dickerson. It's very hard to, if you even want to say today, well, Chris Dickerson was better on the day. He was perhaps better in some body parts, but I thought that Arnold's better body parts outweighed the better parts of Chris Dickerson, and that's how Arnold got the title.
Okay. That's interesting you say that, because I've interviewed, I think I told you this when we talked last weekend, I've interviewed quite a few people who were at the show. Samir Bannout, I talked to Bill Pearl, Boyer Coe, Roger Walker, and they all said that Arnold should have placed like fifth or lower. Do you think that was just sour grapes? Do you think that was because they were competing against him?
I won't judge them and say sour grapes, but I do think that it's impossible to remove yourself in a subjective manner from that event when you're so closely associated with it. Yeah. Like, for example, I respect Bill Pearl's thoughts and comments, but he was the coach of Chris Dickerson, and the guys that were in it, well, they were entitled to their opinions, but I don't agree with them. And in my case, I wasn't particularly friends with anybody in the contest. I'm just giving you my subjective thoughts as an independent person. The only person I probably really knew a little bit was Chris Dickerson from his Navy Universe days. So that's why early on I thought he was in with a good chance to win it. But I also knew Arnold a little bit too from having worked with him. And of course Frank Zane similarly. But I didn't class any of them as close friends, and so my thoughts are entirely unbiased and removed completely from the competitors and removed from the promoter of the contest, because although I knew him, again, he wasn't a close friend. He was just a guy from Sydney, and I lived 1,000 miles away in Adelaide. So people that were in the contest are entitled to feel whatever they feel. They would feel upset that they didn't place higher. But I think it's somewhat ridiculous if you were to suggest that Arnold should have placed 7th or something like that, because clearly that was not a realistic thing to say based on what we all saw on the stage.
Yeah, and I think you had a better viewpoint too, Wayne. I mean, if you were in the show and competing against Arnold, you're not going to be able to see how he looked, but you were sitting in the photographer's pit and you had a good viewpoint of both the prejudging and the night show.
Yes, in fact, it was even better than the photographer's pit. I had a particular row and area just for myself, which okay. I had organised as part of the deal that I was at the event, and so I had the prime seat, in my opinion, in the centre of the row, right at the front. And I don't recall any other photographer either side of me. I was just there on my own with the prime position to shoot the contest, and I'd have to rate that as the greatest contest that I've ever been involved with, because
really?
it's still so talked about today, and people are still buying the DVD of that contest today as keenly as if it had happened last year.
Right.
So it's been a remarkable contest, the way it's held its appeal and its interest for so long. And there was a documentary made, a sort of a behind-the-scenes documentary called The Comeback, and that also had a tremendous life and tremendous interest, and that showed some highlights of the contest, but it wasn't a contest video. It was a people behind-the-scenes type of video, and I understand that Arnold has now bought the copyright of that particular DVD. I think he now owns it. It was independently made at the time of the contest, and so it's now very hard to get copies of this particular DVD, because I think the last distributor has now sold out of all of the copies. So I hope to see that one will be back on the market in the future. So make a note of it, The Comeback. It's a wonderful, different look at Arnold, Tom Platz, and the whole contest. Do you have a copy of it?
Yes, yeah, I've owned that for quite a few years.
Yeah, I thought you would. But that's an excellent alternate view of the competition. And it also gives a little bit of an insight into how Arnold would psych out competitors and how he would think and how he would act. So I recommend that every bodybuilding fan should try and get hold of a copy of that. It's a great documentary.
Yeah. Speaking of Arnold's persona, do you think that just his charisma and his stage presence had maybe something to do with him winning that contest and pulling ahead of Chris Dickerson?
Oh, I'm sure it did, because it was obviously quite close between them, talking body part by body part. But when it came to the charisma and the on-stage performance, I think Arnold was clearly quite a bit ahead of Chris. I mean, Chris was not. I'm not saying that he was poor on stage, but Arnold was brilliant on stage, and he just stepped it up a gear, and he acted like a winner from the beginning to the end, and he turned out to be the winner. So it's just one of those things. I can't think of anybody who had a better stage presence and a better stage strategy than Arnold. And thinking about today, I don't think there's anybody that acts quite like Arnold on stage. Everybody's fairly straight down the line and do things by the books.